Welcome to The Growth Project, a podcast brought to you by AMPLOS. Great to be here today. Dr. Drew Brannon, joined by Dr. Milt Lowder for a conversation. Welcome to the conversation.
I always enjoy the conversation.
We're going to explain a scenario, and I think as you hear the scenario, of course, want you to be honest with yourself, but we think this is a spot in a situation that is very relatable that many people have been in, regardless of what industry you're in, regardless of what you spend your minutes and hours each day doing. So here's the scenario. I had a conversation not too long ago with someone who is a leader within his company, and the summary of it would be this: he was frustrated. And the reason he was frustrated was he told me about the details of someone on the team who was not performing very well, was not doing a good enough job, and he was frustrated about his lack of performance. So we had kind of worked together for him to go talk to this person on the team and give the feedback, and he was now reporting back on how the conversation went. And my question to him was, as probably most of us would say, how did it go? And his answer to me was, it was okay. And then I said, well, did you tell him this, and this? Like, in other words, we had a plan and you had decided that you wanted to cover the items A, B, and C. And when I asked if he did, his answer was kind of. And so, like, I don't like those words that much. And
no. That kind of means there's a gray.
Yeah.
Kind of, and either you did or you didn't.
So my reaction to that was like, well, that is a problem. Why? So, like, when the answer is kind of, when we turn in a kind of type effort, like, why is that a problem?
My first thought is, well, you don't really know what you did or what you didn't do when you think about kind of.
True.
You know, that hey, maybe I told him a little bit, but I didn't give him everything. Kind of leaves vagueness. It leaves uncertainty. There's not a full commitment. There's not consistency in, here's what we're doing, here's a game plan that we're following, and it leaves doubt.
Yeah.
Especially
right.
in this situation.
Yeah, for sure.
You know, but oftentimes kind of in our own life, it leaves doubt in our own mind. Did I do everything I could? Did I exhaust the moment? Did I give my best? And so anytime that kind of answer is kind of, it means you really didn't.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Kind of equals no.
Yeah.
And we've all done this. So I want to be real careful.
No, yeah, absolutely.
I want to be real careful that we're not like taking this example and kind of like pointing our finger at someone and being like, how could you? You know, we've all done this. But I agree, it's a problem on many levels, because when you go the route of kind of, that is the equivalent of looking for a shortcut, maybe hoping to find a kind of a back door or a side door or some other, what I would call kind of like indirect, passive, hope for the best type move.
Yeah, and I think, you know, what are some reasons behind that? There is maybe a lack of confidence. Maybe there's a lack of clarity. Maybe there's some uncertainty about what they're trying to do, what they're trying to accomplish. In this situation you mentioned, it was very crystal clear, here's what I want you to do.
Right.
Here, and so sometimes I was given kind of the benefit of the doubt. People hadn't spelled it out that clearly. They don't have a game plan. They kind of general picture of what they want to accomplish, and it's not very specific. In this situation, very specific, but the anxiety around the conversation, the discomfort of the conversation, the stepping into the conversation, I think that's where kind of leaves us with a sense of less than.
Yeah.
And you and I talk about part of our job as husbands, as fathers, as psychologists, to help minimize regret. And kind of means I have a little bit of regret. I didn't step into it. There are a number of different reasons for that.
Yeah, and that I agree. There's no doubt that can accompany that. But I think, like, how do we end up this way? Like, why does it take shape this way sometimes? And I think the truth of it is, sometimes it works.
Yeah.
Like, there are instances in which we turn in a kind of response, whatever you like. You can apply that to different examples kind of broadly, but sometimes it works. And that is that kind of like, whether it's unconscious or conscious reinforcement of like, oh, okay, so like I can do it this way and still get the outcome that I wanted. Our brain, it really is kind of then telling us of like, well, this is an acceptable way to go about it.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, your brain's looking for the path of least resistance. It's very efficient and very lazy. And if you can get by with kind of, your brain's trying to kind of protect you from putting in that little bit extra. And you talked about the unconscious reinforcement. The strongest form of reinforcement is intermittent reinforcement. Every now and then it works. Every now and then, I don't have to tell the whole truth, or I don't have to step into it, or I can skirt the issue, or I can shortchange the operation. I mean, how many get rich quick schemes have we seen? And so that's kind of what the human, it seems to me, the human side of us is really looking for. We want to avoid pain. We want to avoid discomfort. We want to avoid suffering. And so kind of our brain tricks us into saying, let me protect you here.
Yes. And it's like we talk about this of how it's almost like this mentality of you're hoping no one notices. It's like, hey, I'm going to like I know it probably should be this way, or this is what needs to be said, or this is what needs to be done. But if in a conscious example, I'm going to instead kind of like do it this way, and maybe no one will notice. And like, man, that can become problematic.
And I think on that side, the person that knows the most is you.
For sure.
And
sometimes the only one who knows.
I think if we think about, even if it worked out, only you know if you did your best.
Right.
You know if you put forth your best effort. Because we talk about, hey, let's reward effort. How do you create a mastery learning environment where people are willing to go all in? Well, one is rewarding effort, but effort's really hard to measure.
Yeah.
And so sometimes the outcome, what you're saying is, I get the result, or it's acceptable, and I create a pattern of behavior that kind of lets me get by. Jim Collins, the first line of the book, Good to Great. Good is the enemy of great. That we often settle for good instead of pushing ourselves to greatness, and kind of captures that perfectly.
Okay, so let's get into some examples of this, because I agree with that, is that it's long-term, ultimately, this is not a winning formula.
Yes.
And we know that this kind of way of being can rear its head in many different examples. Let's talk about a few examples here. And I think maybe for the first one of the three that we're going to highlight today in our conversation, let's even circle back to where we started. I offered that example of something that really occurred not too long ago in a conversation. But the category we're really hitting on there is feedback conversations, which everybody's had these before, right? So you got to sit down with somebody, and it is time to tell the truth. However, sometimes we kind of do that, right? So in that example, what goes on there? Like why does a person show up with a clear idea and a clear understanding of, okay, here's what I'm going to say. And then when it comes time to say what you said you're going to say, you don't quite do it. What's going on there?
I mean, there's a number of factors. One, I always go back to Emily Dickinson's poem about telling the truth, but tell it slant, success and circuit lies. The truth must dazzle gradually, or every man be blind. And so I think part of, in those situations, you're trying to tell the truth in such a way they can digest the truth.
Could be.
And especially if you're a leader in that situation, or you care about the other person, the emotion of the moment, the anxiety of the moment. What does anxiety do? Stress makes you selfish. It creates separation. And so if I walk in there with a clear game plan, then I got to sit across the table and look at somebody that I care about. And I don't want to say things that are hurtful, especially as a leader. Right. You and I talked about the more power your position gives you, the less you need to assert that power. So mindful of the power differential, what you end up ultimately doing is kind of telling the truth, kind of hoping they get the message, kind of hoping you can let them down gently, kind of not hurt their feelings, and that leads to a whole host of problems.
Yeah. Because I agree with that. Now here's where it really gets challenging is, where is the intersection between the loving side of what you just said and the loving side of like, I got to tell the truth.
Yeah.
Like, because sometimes the most loving thing you can do is tell the truth.
And so it's how you tell the truth, and are you attacking the person or the problem?
Right.
And so, but all the anxiety around that, you avoid having that just for reasons we discussed. But I think when you walk into a situation, you're ready to give that feedback, the stress, the anxiety, the emotion, you don't know how it's going to be heard. You don't want to hurt the other person, that you avoid that.
Yeah.
And then what happens I'm guilty of this, I want to be honest. I'm trying to be mindful and be encouraging to people, especially people maybe work here with us, and then frustration builds, and then it comes out in a way that's probably not very healthy.
Not loving, yeah. So I do think there's a difference between, and I don't claim to be anywhere near an expert on this, but there's a difference between finding a way to tell the truth with love versus diluting the truth. I think those things can be pretty different. And I think the danger we run into when we dilute it so much, then whoever's receiving that isn't even understanding what we're trying to say.
I don't, whether it's diluting the truth or not wanting to hurt them, the intentions may be the same, but the outcomes are the same. Whatever your intention is in that situation, what happens is there's not as much clarity, there's not alignment,
right?
There's not agreement. People walk out of there and it's like, oh, I feel good.
Yeah.
And the other person's like, what'd you hear?
Right.
It's why if you go back to, what was that 1 minute manager, the sandwich piece.
Yeah.
Let me tell you something really good.
Yeah.
Let me put something in between. Let me close with something really good. Well, the research has not held that out.
No, people don't like that a whole lot.
What creates so much confusion?
Yeah.
Or you and I have had situations or walking through situations in these difficult times where you have to let somebody go. And you come to that place and time, and a mixed message can be, I'm so sorry. Well, if you're really sorry.
You're sorry, they don't do this.
Exactly. And so, but especially in the South, where you're trained to be pleasant, where you're trained to be nice, where you're socialized, we don't practice enough giving the feedback.
Yeah.
And we don't create it where it's a reciprocal relationship.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think it's important to acknowledge this too, as we're talking about, we realize these are tough. Like, it is really tough to get into a conversation with someone you have a relationship with, whether that's personal, professional, sometimes both of those two things, and talk about something that's got some tension to it. That's really, really tough. However, I think it's important to recognize, like, here's what's normal to go on inside of a person in those situations is like, yeah, you begin to feel emotional and you begin to have some degree of like, oh gosh, apprehension, confusion, uncertainty. Your mind can begin to like roll back and you're recalling good things and not so good things. And there's just so much to that moment. It's not hard to see or understand why people end up doing the kind of thing. Not hard at all. But I think a big part of what we want our listeners to hear in this conversation is recognize the follow-up problems that can occur as a result of that.
Yeah, that brain, the fight or flight response. And so that perceived threat, I'm gonna hurt this relationship, I'm gonna say the wrong thing, the other person's gonna get mad, that risk becomes so great that we experience it just like a life or death event.
Yeah, could be.
And so then we interpret those emotions in a different way, and then we aren't clear in our thinking, we aren't communicating clearly, and we're looking to get out of the situation as fast as possible.
Yeah, it becomes the kind of the avoidant mechanism there is like,
yes,
get me out of here.
Yeah.
Get me out of here. And so things go unsaid, things are not well or clearly communicated, and then whatever the thing or things were that brought you to the table to begin with are most likely going to just continue.
Oh, and get worse.
Yeah. So, there's a lot to that. And I think the reason we're highlighting this example is because of how common it is. I mean, again, that was the example that started our conversation of everybody understands how everybody has their own version of this. But I think if we have a better awareness around how natural it is for this to occur, the better position we are in to try to do it differently.
Yeah, I think this problem is universal.
It is, for sure.
In all of our relationships. And so we think about that first reason. Okay, why do we do kind of and feedback? Hopefully you kind of understand that and can grasp, the physiological components, the cognitive components, the relational components, the emotional components that interfere with clarity and consistency around communication. What's another area that really kind of find kind of showing up?
So I think
why?
A second example that pops up a bunch would be a dynamic where where a person on a team is turning in a kind of level effort, a kind of level demeanor, disposition, on and on, and it's happening because the leader is permitting it. So for lack of better names, Johnny is showing up every day, and he's just kind of into it, but not fully into it, and his leader, Susie, is just permitting it. Right? He's not doing enough to get fired. He's also not doing enough to be on par with a bought-in way of doing things. He's just hanging out kind of in the middle, and Susie is just letting it happen, permitting it.
Yeah. Yeah, and so there's a number of reasons why this can happen. To me, I go right to leader or manager. What's the leader's responsibilities? How much is the leader trying to take on? How busy is that leader in terms of what they're expecting and what they're communicating? Mm-hmm. And so I think the leader in this situation allows because maybe they're so busy and focused on their own work. Maybe they've got too many things in front of them. We've seen some leaders on teams, and they're trying to lead 24 people.
Yeah, just very unrealistic
or manage 24 people.
Yeah.
And so who gets your attention? It's usually the ones that are really struggling. So little Johnny's coming in kind of doing okay. The leader shifts their focus to people who aren't doing anything.
Right. Yeah.
And so you have competing priorities and competing challenges, competing people. And so Susie may be allowing this kind of to happen just because she doesn't have the bandwidth or resources to really speak into it.
Yeah. I mean, if you got 24 people on the team, the person turning in the kind of type effort, that might be the least of your concerns at any given moment, where you got some people on the team that you wish would turn in a kind of type effort. But we know that long term, and when it comes to kind of achieving excellence and pursuing goals of significance, that isn't going to cut it.
Yeah. How many times, Drew, have we seen think of a salesperson? They hit their number for the month, they hit their number for the quarter, but they're kind of going through the motions with everything else.
Yep.
And the leader will allow the kind of commitment on everything else, the culture, being a great teamwork, turning your work in on time, all like following the game plan because you're hitting your number.
Right.
So we allow that because we sacrifice, outcome for commitment. Mm-hmm. That this person's hitting their number, so I'm going to let them get away with this. I can deal with the kind of over here because they're hitting their number. And
this is just an example. I don't know who said this quote. I know it wasn't me, but the classic, what you permit, you promote. That's what's happening here. Yeah. Is we're allowing and permitting this kind of set of behaviors, which is passively saying, I'm good with it. Like, keep on going, keep on doing it, and I'm good with it.
One of the things, Drew, that we hadn't talked about that is in my mind is the leader's mindset. We hear people making excuses for other people's behavior or effort or work ethic or commitment, or, hey, this generation doesn't want to work, or this generation doesn't want to do this, or it's hard to find good talent. And so we allow because we have such low expectations of others. And sometimes of ourselves in the process.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, sometimes, let's go back to the leader. Maybe I'm in a kind of mentality right now, so I can't exactly or shouldn't be demanding more from people on the team if I'm functioning in a way that's kind of a kind of way of living. And that happens all the time too, for a million different reasons. But, so really if I were to put this example in a category, we're talking about standards of behavior, standards of excellence, standards of thinking. And, the middle performer, the middle way of being isn't something that really drives high performance. And so that's why I think leaders, if you're hearing this and you're thinking about where you might stand on the continuum here, Why should this be on your radar and why should it be important? Well, if you're trying to perform at a high level with consistency over the long haul, that's why it should matter.
Yeah, and I think about these three different areas, or the kind of. We talk about the top performer, the kind of, and the bottom performer. We spend a lot of research and working with companies now to drive engagement. And I think about those three groups. Well, there are only about 32% of people that are engaged in their work. About 50% are not engaged. And so that not engaged is kind of the kind of group.
It's the majority.
Yeah, the majority. So your top performers are producing, about 14% or 18% are disengaged. You're trying to figure out what to do with them. The kind of can just kind of get by.
Yep. And I mean, think about that data, and we will have more conversations, extended conversations on that. But more than half the people in the U.S. workforce, given the most recent data, are kind of people. They're kind of like, well, it's not that big a deal.
And so as a leader, think about the mindset. It's like, man, I 50% of my team is kind of going through the motions. It's kind of showing up. It's kind of doing like, I don't even know how to process that.
Where do I start?
And so I know what this 14% or 18% like that are disengaged.
Yeah.
They're struggling. My top performers, as long as they're producing, as you said, the kind of like the squeaky, the squeaky wheel gets the grease or whatever. That is the top and the bottom. We just kind of let these middle kind of go through the motions.
Yep.
And there's a lot of places to hide in corporate America.
That is true. Okay, let's go to our third example here. So we started with feedback, and then we talked about kind of standards. This third example of where this kind of can show up, less about kind of the leader-team dynamic. Now we're talking about just for an individual, right? And so you could be an individual performer within a large company. You could be an entrepreneur doing your own thing. There's a million examples of this, but this is strictly for an individual. Why do people sometimes live with this posture of, I'm not going to go all in? Why does that happen?
It protects them. It's a protective mechanism. Go back to growth and fixed mindset, right? That fixed mindset says, if I give my best effort and I don't succeed, what does that say about me?
Right.
It means I don't have what it takes. It means I must not be good enough. I must not be smart enough. I must not be talented enough. I can't do this. So we avoid going all in to kind of protect our ego. Yeah, and so I remember going back, my high school glory days of baseball. I had a chance to play some small school baseball and try to walk on at Clemson. And there's things I look back in my life, I could have just focused on one sport. I could have hit the weight room harder. But when I showed up for Clemson, I was prepared. I worked out all summer. I was ready to go. But I remember thinking in my mind, I don't want to be 40 years old and tell myself I could have done that.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to be that guy sitting in the stands going, that could have been me. And so I think a lot of times people aren't willing to take that risk and put it all out there because they want to be the person that says, I could have done this and I could have done that. I should have done this. And so I think that's part of, well, what am I willing to really risk here?
Right.
And I think it starts even more so, Drew. What is it that I really want?
Yeah.
And I think we don't provide clarity around our vision, around our dreams, around our goals, and we just find ourselves going through the motions in life, and we settle in so many different areas of our life.
Yeah, what I hear you say is that the human psyche loves an insurance policy.
Yeah.
I mean, we love a safety net. We love an out. We love something we can point to and kind of hang our hat on other than us that will rescue us, that will give us something to point to and that isn't us to explain some form of disappointment.
I feel like I need to give you an amen on that one. That sums up, at least I think, America in today's world. Like, we want it to be somebody else's fault. We want to make excuses. We don't want to take ownership.
Yeah. And I think, it's not hard to understand why people are attracted to that, right? But I think here's the big issue, and the tension of this is, many, many people in the world are doing that right now, although they either don't know they are or don't think they are. And there's a level out there that they aren't on and I'm not talking about from a result or outcome standpoint. We've talked about that like a million times. We don't control that ultimately. But what we put into it is up to us. And there are a lot of people out there that are not on the level they could be in terms of what they're putting into it because they're trying to stay safe.
You know, you and I have young children in middle school, high school, college, and we think about the power of peer pressure at that age. Mm-hmm. And what do you not want to do in high school? You don't want to stand out in a negative way. And in this world where we live in is full of critics. It's full of people who doubt you. It's full of people who want to pull you down so they can feel better about themselves.
Right.
We're socialized not to go for it.
Yeah.
And because people, I mean, social media is full of people who make mistakes, people who say the wrong thing, people who fall on their faces. We love a fall from glory. And so what we get is a group of people who avoid going all in. What will they say about me? Not what will I feel? Mm-hmm. What will they say about me?
Mm-hmm. Well, sometimes how I feel will just be in light of what they say about me, you know, like you're saying.
And we don't ever grow out of it.
Yeah. Yeah. What would they think? Could I recover? How would I recover? Where would I go from there? How would that affect my image? Just all these questions, many of which shouldn't be the ones we're worried about, but are the ones we're worried about. And as a result of that, people just kind of like play their cards close.
Yeah. And we don't share the dreams.
Yeah.
We don't take the risk. We don't have the hard conversations. We don't hold ourselves to a higher standard or others because we're just worried of how that outcome may be. And we talk all the time about giving yourself permission to be human. And accepting those limitations of being human without accepting those limits. And so these are challenges we all face and will continue to face. Mm-hmm. And I think, you know, you've kind of summed up nicely these three different areas where kind of shows up. And so since we can all relate, what are a couple of suggestions that we can do to kind of remove the to minimize regret?
Yeah, that's a good question. Well, I think part of it starts with where, you know, the place where we always start all forms of growth and development is you got to try to find a way to accurately determine what you're doing. Like if it's up to me alone to know where I am on, let's just make up this term, the kind of continuum. If I'm trying to do that by myself, that's not a good dynamic.
Yeah.
It's not good for me. It's not good for the people around me. So I think my first answer is we've got to try to find an effective, accurate, candid feedback source on where I stand on this type of question.
Well, yeah, I think awareness is, we talk about all the time. We don't have a high level of self-awareness. And so being able to have someone, or at least you're willing to ask the questions to get that kind of feedback.
Yeah. Yep.
And I think it's okay to start with yourself and then get feedback on it. Oh,
yeah, I agree. I think it's definitely okay to start with yourself, but even just the question of like, I think it's fine to ask yourself like, well, like, am I all in? Like, am I in? Great place to start. But then I think, you know, the next step is to ask somebody else who will tell you the truth. Like, hey, I feel like I'm pretty much all in. I don't feel like I'm going the kind of route with respect to this, whatever thing we're talking about. But what do you think? Like, what's your perspective? What's your opinion of how in or not so in I might be in whatever you're talking about?
Yeah.
Which could be a bunch of different things. I mean, what are your thoughts on where people can go to assess this, work on this, any of that?
Yeah, I think as you assess this in your own life and you get honest feedback, you know, pay attention to when you find yourself fully immersed, fully engaged, inspired by the work you're doing, inspired by the people you're with. So not only looking for the areas of your life where you're kind of going through the motions, but look at the areas of your life where you're completely consumed and caught up in the work that you're doing and the life that you're leading. I think that those two areas right there can kind of give you more of a clue. Well, I know when I'm going to kind of, I know when I'm going through the motions. Mm-hmm. And then these are the moments where I'm not. This is when I find myself dreaming. This is when I find myself learning. This is when I find myself pushing myself even further. This is when I am fully engaged. This is when I'm at my best. And so that's part of this assessment as well.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think that, you know, the next part, of course, is just be willing to do something with the information. Whether it's information you give you, whether that's information someone else gives you, do something with it. And don't succumb to what we talked about in our final example here, number 3, of being afraid to go all in, and whatever that means. And I think it's probably important to say too, what we aren't advocating for, and that is some form of like naive, blind, I don't know what you would call it, like whatever your example is.
In any situation, to go walk into your boss's office right now and tell him what you really think about him, that's probably not what we're recommending.
I mean,
we don't want you.
If you love and passionate about funnel cakes, this is not an endorsement to go start a funnel cake food truck or whatever. I don't know.
Yeah, you know me, I can be impulsive in my decision making, and so this is not, but it is for you to pay attention. What are those things that you really want to do? What are the dreams you want to pursue? What do you really want? Then Drew, a little bit more of what you're willing to give up.
Yeah. So I think where as you're hearing this conversation, some of these might feel really applicable to your life, and others might not feel very applicable at all, and we understand that. I think probably the biggest takeaway we would hope you would have from a listener standpoint is just be honest with yourself and be willing to look across the landscape of your life and tell yourself the truth about where this might fit. And, where it fits, take it on honestly, and where it doesn't, you can discard that. But take it on and see what kind of shifts and adjustments you might make. And you might be surprised in a short period of time. Maybe it won't be until a long period of time, but we feel strongly you will see some benefit.
Yeah. We always talk about getting comfortable being uncomfortable. And so once you get that honest assessment, how are you going to stretch yourself and start small? Start pushing yourself in different ways. Clarify, if it's a tough conversation, clarify the purpose and intent of that conversation. If it's, hey, holding your team to a higher standard, where can you provide clarity and consistency and balance with priorities? What are the standards? And if it's this mindset of dreaming and pursuing something of who you are becoming, not necessarily what you are achieving, then how do you step into that? Because we don't want you to look back at the end of your life. We don't want you to look back at the end of your career and be that guy that I said I don't want to be. I could have done that. Mm-hmm. Or I should have done that.
Yep.
And we don't want to live with that regret.
And I think just one last thing to say, I know we're kind of moving toward our close for this conversation, but just going into whatever type of adjustments you might try to make, it's okay to mess up. Like, I think people need to realize that is if you have this internal felt need of, I got to do it all right every time with no exception, you won't do this. Like you'll continue to hold back and have some degree of passivity in your life because you want to stay safe, play, as we said earlier, play your cards tightly and closely. Like, it is okay to lean into the conversation and maybe make a mistake. It's okay to decide you're going to up your game and your level of engagement in what you're doing and it not go perfectly well. All of that is okay. And if you're not okay with it not being okay all the time, you won't do it.
We can give you a few other podcasts to listen to around changing your mindset. I think if it's not only okay, it's perfectly human.
Yeah.
You're going to make mistakes. You're going to fall short. You're going to mess up. You're going to say the wrong thing. You're going to get emotional. You're going to avoid taking the steps towards it. So that forgiveness that we often talk about, when you find yourself in that situation, forgive yourself and let that forgiveness lead to a freedom and action as you move forward.
Okay, well, so just as a close today, listen for that phrase in terms of how you might be using it, and listen for that phrase in terms of how it might exist in your life, and see where it might take you. Any final thoughts?
No.
Well, as always, thank you for tuning in. If you have found our podcast over time to be helpful and beneficial in your life, which we hope you have, we always appreciate reviews. You can find us on both Apple Podcasts and Spotify, but love to hear from our listeners, not just in terms of how we're doing in terms of serving you, but also ideas for how we can improve and grow with the Growth Project. So with that, look forward to our next conversation, and thank you for today.